We go. Okay, and we are on the air. Hi, everybody. It's Annie McCann here, coming to you live from her home in Western Sydney, better known as the land of the Darug people. I'm here for a special virtual event with Book Fair Australia. As you may have heard already, Book Fair Australia will be going live with their festival in early 2026 in Melbourne, Victoria. We are still very busy and keeping the name alive by having some virtual events in the lead up to the festival. And I'm very excited to be here to be presenting three amazing authors who are sharing the virtual stage with me for a special virtual event. So, coming to you live from the US, we have Patri Jones. Coming to us live from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, we have Raida Shah Aidil. Hey. And of course, coming to you live from just over the fence from where I live, we've got Isabel Magnadino. Welcome. Welcome to all of you. I'll get everybody to introduce themselves shortly. But just to give you some context, so I am the author liaison and MC for Book Fair Australia. It's been running since, oh, this is testing my memory now. I think we started talking about it at the end of 2021. I think we went live in 2022, and it has been what I like to call a trajectory of success, where each year it's getting better and better, with amazing authors coming under one roof, particularly in Sydney Olympic Park and Victoria, are going to finally get their chance to meet all their wonderful authors. And one of the things I love doing when I'm part of Book Fair Australia is meeting fantastic authors, learning about their journey, and just sharing the stage with them. And today I'm sharing the virtual stage with three amazing authors who have published books, not just in the middle grade space, not just in the fantasy fiction space, but one common denominator that we all share as writers is that we've infused our Southeast Asian culture in our middle grade fantasy books that we're going to be talking about today. So, we're going to be exploring Southeast Asian fantasy in the middle grade space. It's definitely something very new, and the books that each of us have written and published have not ever been seen before in the middle grade space. So, I'm really excited to be sharing the stage with all of these lovely ladies today, and we're going to talk about each other's books. And of course, the importance of representation, particularly our cultures, and just our writing journey in general. So I hope you enjoy our special treat for you today. To start us off, Patri, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll share a copy of your books at the end of your intro.
Awesome. Hello, my name is Patrick Jones. I am a middle grade fantasy author based here in Los Angeles, California. Skylight, I'm the first book in my series is called Skylight, and it is a Thai-inspired fantasy. It is a planned trilogy, but I also have a second chapter book called The White Elephant of Himapan. I am married, 2 kids. I have one big fat lazy dog that I always tell people about. He's a shepherd, German shepherd, timber wolf mix, but he's the biggest chicken I've ever seen. So growing up, I loved watching Thai dramas. When I had my own kids, I wanted to be able to find something to share my culture with them. And so I always try to infuse myself into my books and my stories. And I am delighted to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Fatrine. I can't wait to see pictures of your dog. It reminds me of the Harry Potter dog. There's a three-headed dog called Fluffy, or a wimpy dog called Fang. So this is exactly what I thought when you told me about your dog. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. And I've had the pleasure of reading your book, Skylight, and that was the first time I've ever read a middle grade fantasy book that had Thai culture. So I'm very excited to be sharing this. So for those at home, this is a copy of Skylight. So it is available at leading retailers or online, depending on where you're coming from. So definitely get your hands on this. It's the first of the Mech Light series, and it is definitely worth the read. It was a very quick read for me. Flew through this. It was so good. And I'll also show you a copy of The White Elephant of Himpan, which is a middle grade book as well, as Patrine mentioned, and definitely infuses the Thai elements and Thai culture there. So yeah, available in all leading retailers. Make sure you get yourself a copy after this. Thank you, Patri.
Thank you.
Let's cross over to Malaysia. Garida, you're up.
Thank you, Annie. So I'm Raida Shah Aidil. I am an author based in Malaysia. I was born in Singapore and moved to Sydney when I was 12. And I got married to my Malaysian husband, then came back to Malaysia, well, for the first time as an adult. And this is my book, How to Free a Jinn. And it was this experience of like growing up as a minority, like Muslim, Malay, and then experiencing a whole slew of mostly negative things, and coming back as an adult, and realizing that, wow, I am allowed to be completely normal in Malaysia. I look like everybody else for the first time in my life. And having that creative freedom to then dream up the middle grade fantasy I wish I had read growing up. I live with my mother-in-law, my husband, and our three young children. Every day is an adventure of multi-generational drama and lots of cuddles and lots of sobbing and tantrums from everyone involved. But I feel that that has really given the heart of my book its authenticity because I'm living it every day, minus the creepy gin stuff, obviously. So things
But everyone in Malaysia has a gin story.
I know. So it's, yep, everyone has a gin story. Absolutely.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'll just share a copy of Rhoda Shah Ideal's book. Here it is on screen, How to Free a Gin. And I read this. I had the pleasure of reading this. It was fantastic. And I think I was probably keeping Katraida up all night with all my messages for every page or chapter I turned. It was really, really cool. But that is available in all reading retailers or online, depending on where you're from. So definitely pick up a copy of that as soon as you can. It is such a cool read. Thank you very much. Now to our Australian shores, let's cross over to Western Sydney. We've got Isabel Magnadino. Go for it, Isabel.
Hi everyone, my name's Isabel and I am a middle grade fantasy author as well. I was born in the Philippines but am now based in Sydney, Australia, and I am the author of this book, The Serpent Rider, which came out in the US last year, but it came out this year in Australia. So I basically started writing books because I really loved hearing the Filipino mythology stories and folk tales that my family told me. And I thought they were really cool. But then when I went to the library or the bookstore, like the only books that were there were inspired by more Western-based mythologies. And I thought, well, Filipino mythology and Southeast Asian mythology in general is pretty cool. So why aren't there more stories about it? So I set out to write my own books. So this is The Serpent Rider, my first book. And then my second book, The Firefly Crown, is releasing in the US in November of this year. I'm a really big fan of all of your books. So thank you so much for having me on this panel.
Oh, our absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Isabel. And I'm going to share a copy of your book on screen for those at home so everybody knows how to get a copy. And just so you're aware, this is the Australian edition because I'm in Oz. So here we go. It's the copy of The Serpent Rider by Isabel Magnadino, and it's available in all leading retailers or online. So get that as soon as you can, definitely. And I wanted to say, actually, Isabel, you're right. That sort of leads into my introduction. I spent a very long time looking as a fantasy fiction reader, looking for books with Indonesian culture or some representation, because like all through Southeast Asia, Indonesia is rich with mythology and legend and folklore. And when I went to the bookstores, the only representation I had for Indonesian was normally contemporary or rom-com, but nothing in the fantasy space. And that was when I thought, well, why not? Why can't it be me? Why can't I be the one to start writing as well? But before I get into that, Isabel, the first time I ever heard a Filipino folklore or legend was a TV series called Grimm. Has anybody here seen Grimm? That's my absolute favorite TV show. Yes, high five. My absolute favorite TV show. I like to call it Criminal Minds meets Brothers Grimm. So Nick Burkhardt is a homicide detective, but he's got the gene to see the Wesen within because he's the last living descendant of the Brothers Grimm. And one of the stories taps into the Filipino folklore of the Aswang. And it was the creepiest story I've ever heard.
That was so scary.
Especially for a mother, I think it would be. It was the creepiest story, and I'm thinking, I'm waiting for someone to write about the Aswang. So if you ever have inspiration, please let me know, because I would totally read that. We might need to sort of water it down for the MG audience with the Aswang.
Yes, I was very terrified by the legends that my family told me. I think I was too young for them, but I think that's a general Southeast Asian experience that monsters are just too scary.
100%, 100%. And yeah, that's the perfect segue. So as I mentioned before to everyone, my name's Annie McCann. I'm the author liaison and MC with Book for Australia, but I too am also a published author. And my book, My Harimau King, which is a middle grade fantasy fiction time travel adventure, will be hitting the shelves in well across the globe, I guess, from 14th of June 2025. So T minus 2 months to go. Oh my God. It's exciting and terrifying that it's out there. And all three of you have read it, so I appreciate you. Thank you so much for reading. Actually, Raisha Ideal was my editor, so fun fact. um,
I
and
read the book. I
sorry,
loved it. It's so much fun. Oh my God,
thank
I loved
you.
it so
Oh, thank you so much. And look, like all of you, I found, re looking at books and reading books. I love reading fantasy. I love reading folklore. Couldn't find anything on the Western bookshelf. And I thought, look, why can't it be me? Because, like I said, Indonesia is rich with mythology, folklore, and legend. But there's an interesting one with regards to my story. So, my Harimau King is about a 13-year-old girl from Parramatta, which is in Western Sydney, and I spent a lot of time there as well. And she's Indonesian Australian, so the character is very loosely based on me. Key difference is though she's grown up not really knowing about her culture or her true identity, whereas since I was born, I've always known like my mum's identity and our history. And so family drama unfolds, people go missing, things start to go a little bit uncontrollably, but then they find this box. And all this stuff that's in there doesn't look like it belongs in a Parramatta home. It should be in a West Javanese museum because um, it's quite regal. There's some weaponry. It's unidentified objects. And the next thing you know, they find something that unlocks a portal that transports them to ancient Pajajaran, which is ancient West Java, Indonesia. And there, Sumaya learns that she's actually one of the last living descendants of an ancient king. But that doesn't mean that she's a princess or that she's got untold riches. It's actually, she's the chosen one to save her family from a prophecy that could wipe out her family line. And it's the race against time to get that done. Otherwise, she could lose her family or friends. So, yeah, I had a lot of fun writing that. As I said, that comes out on the 14th of June. And my main biggest inspiration was the fact that we haven't seen Indonesian MG mythology or fantasy in that space. And fun fact, I am myself one of the last living descendants of an ancient king of Pajajaran, Prabu Raja Siliwangi, who is the feature of my Harimau King, and he has an affiliation with the Harimau, which is a West Javanese tiger. So you'll get to read all about that in this book, which I will share the screen. So here we go, My Harimau King, that's my book, and that will be coming out, hitting the shelves 14th of June 2025, and I hope that's something you will enjoy. That will be available in all retailers and as well as online. There we go. So that's me. Thank you for letting me talk about that for a moment. Let's dive in. Let's talk about our writing journey because, everybody has a different, unique sort of journey. Who'd like to go first? Who'd like to talk about their journey? Everyone's shy.
I'll go. So
Go for it.
this is my standard story. Every time I think about my writing journey, as a kid, I never set out or aspired to be a writer. In high school, I did drama, so I loved plays, and I thought of being a playwright as I got older and went into college. But again, that just was never really in the cards for me. And it wasn't until I had kids that I got back in touch with that side of myself. Meaning, when my kids were little, I would read, like we would read bedtime stories, and then you're shutting the lights off and you're trying to get them to go to sleep. So you're making up crazy tales to just get them, something that's gets them giggling, gets them laughing, gets them to go to hopefully get all that energy out and finally put themselves to sleep. So maybe if the stories weren't so interesting, they would have gone to sleep faster. But my inspiration for writing Skylight it started as a family project. And so I always say in August of 2017, my daughter and I told them stories of an idea I had that I used to imagine that the glimmers in the sky were portals to other worlds as a kid, and wanting to be in touch with it, we wanted to come up with this whole fantasy realm behind it. I had no intentions of leaning into the Thai culture. I didn't know where it was going to go when I started writing it, but I wrote a paragraph, she wrote a paragraph, and we switched off. She stopped on page 2 and I kept going. And then the more I went through that process, it was just so liberating to be able to be in touch with the Thai-ness, because I'm the only one in my family who was born in the US. Everybody else was born in Thailand. And it's really just the three of us, my mother, my sister and I. My father passed away a few years ago. So it was at first just the four of us here in the US. And I always had to learn about being Thai secondhand. So I go back to Thailand, I'm American. And then when I'm here, I'm some version of an Asian in America, right? I'm never really, nobody ever guesses I'm Thai. I get Filipino a lot, all of the time. Or people will think I'm Mexican, they'll think I'm Native American, and everything but Thai. I get Indian, and it's just, being Thai was never something that I embraced as a kid. I had to kind of shy away from it because it just wasn't the time for us to be promptly American. You had to be American. You had to prove your Americanness. And that's not how I wanted my kids to grow up. And that's not how we are now. So being and having the opportunity to create that story with a very strong Thai character, incorporating the language into it as a way to teach simple phrases to my kids and hopefully other Thai Americans, or Thai, kind of those hyphenated students around the world, was really at the heart of writing that of Skylight. And so building on stories that I watched, dramas that I used to watch with my mom, always loved royalty stories, loved the monsters and the yaks and the nagas that are out there, but having to reconnect and like call my mom and talk to my mom all the time, like, how do I say this? How do I write this? What's the word for this? And Google translating it. So it was a weird reconnection with my own homeland that I've only visited twice. It's been over 30 years since I've gone to Thailand, and hopefully sometime in this year I'll be able to take the kids and let them see it for themselves. But that was part of the inspiration of going through writing Skylight and including the Thai American experience, as Sophia, as the main character, doesn't realize she's Thai, or in the story she's actually Meg, which it's the Thai word for cloud. And she realizes she's a lost princess, and they get magicked up into the sky that she finds out everybody knows her, and her parents are always, everyone who she thought was, her parents that she thought were her parents were not actually her parents. And now she's stuck in this decade-long war, in the middle of being 12 and trying to figure out what the heck is going on. So playing off of those two borders, crossing in and cross-culturalness was really at the heart of writing Skylight.
Fantastic. You and I are very similar with that story in terms of, nobody guesses that I'm half Indonesian, half Australian. Like I'm born, pardon me, to an Australian father of Irish descent, hence the name McCann, and then my mum being West Javanese Indonesian. So I'm born to both. And especially being a hijabi too, like people think, oh, is she Turkish? Is she Lebanese? And then before hijab, it was, is she Latina? Is she Spanish? I never got Asian. And it's interesting because, growing up as an Indonesian Australian, I was always very in touch with my West Javanese culture. I could speak Bahasa quite fluently. My West Javanese dialect could be a lot better, of course, but I was very comfortable in knowing I was Indonesian Australian. I had the pleasure of being both. But it wasn't until I was older that, I was either too white to be Indonesian, or I'm more Indonesian than the other Indonesians that said that I wasn't Indonesian. So there, it just sort of made you question, well, where do I stand? Where am I? Like I'm a third culture. Where do I belong? And then especially when you know that, no, I'm actually one of the last living descendants of ancient royalty. It's like, I mean, I'm just as Indonesian as people who are saying I'm not. And it's very, very interesting story. And like yourself as well, loving that richness of Southeast Asian culture as well, that you just wanted that opportunity to capture it and leave that in and leave that for your kids. And when you decide to go to Thailand, make sure you bring a copy of your books, because you need to take photos of yourself holding your books in Thailand. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Okay, should we go around the world again? Karida, we'll go to Malaysia now. Let's do that. Tell us about yourself, Karida. Are you with us, or has the screen frozen? The screen might have frozen. Yep, the Wi-Fi's acting up. That's okay. We'll come back. Isabel, you're up. Tell us about yourself and your writing journey.
Sure. So yeah, I basically always wanted to be a writer when, like, ever since I was small. Whenever someone asked me, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Author was the first job that I remember saying as something that I really, really wanted to do. And I think that was because I just liked reading fantasy books in particular as a way to just escape my current life as a kid and then kind of lose myself in another world. So I knew that fantasy books was something that I always wanted to write. And then when I was a kid, there were a lot of stories because I did have 2 years of primary school, or elementary school as it was called in the Philippines. I had 2 years of school there. So then I did have the chance to be exposed to a lot of the Filipino myths and legends. And like I said at the beginning, I did think those are really cool. But then in sort of like Western literature, I just wasn't seeing that represented there. So I only saw it in the Philippines. And then when I came to Sydney and then was trying to find books to read at the bookshop or the library, there just weren't any Filipino inspired things. So because I'd always wanted to write books, and then I wanted to see Filipino books also on the shelves, that's kind of why I started to try and write a Filipino-based story of my own. And I think my books in particular, so The Serpent Rider is about a girl who has to save her little sister who got kidnapped by a mysterious magician, and she has to save her before this serpent dragon, the Bakunawa, rises from the sea to swallow the final moon, like it swallowed the previous 6 moons. So this sort of like sister dynamic and family relationships is something that really means a lot to me as well, because in the Philippines and in Southeast Asian cultures in general, the family unit is a very important part of the culture. And I think like having these relationships with my family, so most of my family's in the Philippines, but we still have like connections and contacts with each other. And just having such a nice and supportive family around me who's always been supportive of my writing and literature is something that I also wanted to put into my books as well when I wrote. So yeah, it was just a combination of always wanting to write books, wanting to see more Filipino books on bookshelves and in libraries, and then also wanting to add elements of family, which is also something that I guess doesn't get as much spotlight in books compared to like romance arcs or something like that. So I wanted to put in like sister relationships, family dynamics into my books as well. So yeah, that features heavily in The Serpent Rider and also in The Firefly Crown, which is my upcoming book. So yeah, that was basically my writing journey until now.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And that's a very interesting point that you raised about the family unit. When I first wrote My Harimau King and I had somebody read it for a manuscript assessment before I handed it into the publisher, one of the things that she pointed out was, I noticed that the family dynamic is actually quite strong in your book. Like, you know, there's the parents are part of it, the uncle's very part of the adventure with the kids. That's very unusual. You know, maybe you might want to consider breaking away from the family. I said, no, actually, that was by design, because in the Southeast Asian culture, or particularly with the Indonesian culture, right up until adulthood, the family unit is a very strong thing. Family is very, very big part of the culture. And that was definitely something very unique in the middle grade space, or even in YA space as well, where, you know, the character has broken away from their family and went on their own adventure. But this is, you know, it's still a discovery of yourself. It's a discovery of who you are and what your purpose is as part of the narrative, but you're still very connected with your family. And that's a very important part of the Southeast Asian culture. So that's a very interesting point that you've raised. Thank you for sharing that with us as well. And of course, you know, like going through, sorry, I think I had a cloud over. I've got a little bit dark. I might have just to open, there we go. That's a little bit better. And so, where was I? Oh, yeah. So the family dynamic, and then of course, talking about the fact that you've gone to different places and you just can't, you know, find Philippine, you know, folklore and legend and on a Western bookshelf as well. So you've set the precedent there, which I love as well. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Katraida. How are we going with the connection? Are you with us?
I hope so. Can you see me?
Yeah,
Am I still
yeah.
here? Great.
Yeah, you're
Oh my
still with
gosh.
us. It's all good. Tell us about your writing journey and your road to publication.
So I always wanted to be a writer, especially fantasy author, because like very similar story. to both of you. Actually, fantasy novels have been like an escape for me from real life when it got too much. But growing up, like I didn't see anyone in fantasy novels who looked anywhere like me up until the point where Hannah Al-Kaf's book started coming out. So she's, as I'm sure many of you know, she's a really famous Malaysian author who's written middle grade, young adult novels. But the difference between Hannah Al-Kaf and me is I'm a diaspora Malay returnee child, whereas Hannah is beautifully, securely homeland Malaysian through and through. So I thought, you know what? Like, why don't I write a character like that? You know, someone who's always between worlds in some way. So Inshira, the 12-year-old character in my story, was
Oh,
born
sorry, got a bit
in
patchy.
Asia, but then
Oh, there we
moved
go.
to
We're back.
Sydney,
Yeah.
Australia, under mysterious circumstances with her mom, and then had to come back to look.
Oh,
And
sorry. Are you still there?
had to move back to look up. Yep. Can you see
Yeah,
me?
okay.
Oh, still there?
No, just it got a bit patchy, that's all.
Yeah. I'll try to hold still in this particular spot. So my book actually started out like a young adult novel. And the feedback I got was like, okay, your 16-year-old protagonist is really attached to her family, like as though that's a bad thing. And then I realized that the world of publishing has a very particular lens in terms of what is acceptable for young adult fantasy. And unfortunately, romance is a huge aspect. And I was like, my book doesn't have romance. It has like love of family, faith, food. But there's no romance happening. So that's when I realized that my book would actually stand a better chance of being published if I aged it down to middle grade. And I realized that the voice of my story all throughout was actually a very middle grade voice. So I had to do some brutal editing with my agent. So that's a whole other story, getting my agent in the US. Before we finally landed my very first book deal with Allen and Unwin. So it was Australia, go Australia, that gave that first chance to my book before Salam Reads picked it up in the US. But always, throughout the heart of my novel has been a love for family, for faith, you know. And Inshira, I guess in many ways is a character I wish I had read growing up, who's, you know, proudly Muslim but struggles with the fact that growing up as a minority, it scars you, it leaves you with a lot of like doubt and insecurity. And when you're 12, you're navigating like puberty and like your family. It's like it's really tough experiencing that. So I wanted her to have a very loving and peaceful, albeit supernatural, homecoming when she comes back to Malaysia. And I guess writing a neurodivergent character was really important to me as well. So Inshira has anxiety, she's autistic coded, you know, and that's something that I wish I had known about from a younger age. Like for the longest time, I thought I was like, there's something wrong with my brain because I don't seem to get things like everyone else does, but other things are really, really easy. And it wasn't until like my, you know, early 40s, late 30s, where I realized, oh, that's why. I am not neurotypical. That explains everything. So wanting to have a book that had a character just like me, I'm hoping it'll bring some comfort to another child out there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kat. And you're doing beautifully battling your technology where you are. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Yes, thank you so much. And you touched on some fantastic points there, Kat, like, you know, about representation was one of the biggest things. And that's what I'm hearing throughout this conversation is that importance of representation and not just with culture, but also with self. Like you talk about, you know, infusing, you know, a character or infusing character in your book who is neurodivergent, and that's important to bring that representation. And that's something that I'm actually quite passionate about as well, in terms of literature and representation matters. And like one of the things I'm hearing throughout is the fact that none of us grew up with the stories that we wrote. Like this is our chance to have written a story for the younger generation. And like you, Karaida, I actually started writing out a YA novel. So my Harimo King originally, when I wrote it 5 years ago for a book fellowship or writer's fellowship, started out as a YA. And I wanted to give a shout out to Wei Chim. She's a YA author. If anybody knows her books, The Surprising Power of a Good Dumpling was, I think, the most recent YA book she had. And Freedom Swimmer was her first book. She had a quick read of my manuscript, and she's like, the voice that was coming out of your story, Annie, is more middle grade. I think you should maybe, lower the age, because there's an opportunity here. And so when I reread it, just like Cut Right, it was a lot of editing and cutting that down and changing a few things. But yeah, definitely. Something sparked there as well. And yeah, the fact that it was also important to have that authentic self as part of the story as well. Um, Here's a question to the floor. We talked about how we're quite niche in the area, like we're the first of its kind in middle grade. We didn't grow up with these stories, and this is one of the reasons why we started writing. What's changed? Why do you think that we have a place now in the world for our stories? And this is open to anybody who'd like to answer first.
Okay.
Everyone's so tired. I think everyone's like, oh, should I direct questions?
I'll take it. In the US, so like when I read Christina Soonthorn-Vatt's books, and so she is also a Thai American author based in Texas, and so she's known for A Wish in the Dark, which is her Thai. It is middle grade as well, but it's like her Thai spin on Les Miserables. And it's this story that it follows it. And so when I picked it up and I read her one, I was like, oh, there's another actual Thai author in there in this space. And I think she's with Scholastic or whatnot. So it's a larger book, but she has that series. And it was the first time that I got to see the use of Thai names, cultures, and settings in any type of young fiction book. It was definitely something that growing up I would never have seen. I mean, you're talking about, you were growing up with C.S. Lewis and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or Beverly Cleary and the Ramona series, and I would try to read. You're reading those things, but you have like Roald Dolls and like Matildas and a lot of these fanciful kinds of stories that never featured anybody that looks anything like any of us in any of those books. If it was, you were like a side character who's off. And even like in shows, you're going to be like the one token Asian who's walking around that's just like indescript. And always growing up, I think I was always humored by the idea that they always had, like, you can have a Filipino actor playing a Chinese character who's speaking Japanese in this white school. And so you don't, like, in our spaces, we don't see any of that. And especially I think with Southeast Asian, when I found Christina's work, I really enjoyed the fact that it used Thai culture and that it was leaning into it. So I knew that if I was going to write, and when I started writing, I wanted to make sure that that voice was prominent in it, and that there was no qualms about who is at the center and what culture is at the center of it. Because now is the time that, at least in America, we're going through so many cultural, political issues that people have to be unapologetic about who they are. And I think the newer and younger generations, they're more accepting of who they are as individuals, and they're more accepting of the multiple cultural dimensions. And like biracial, you'll have a lot of biracial kids. My kids are biracial, so I know that they're never going to experience things the way that I did. And it was important to have those discussions. And the kids nowadays are a lot smarter than you give them credit for. And I think previous classical middle grade work talks down to kids, and they treat kids as if they don't really know what's going on. And I don't see that. As a mom of an 11 and a 16-year-old, I think they're really smart, and they will run like circles around me. And the things that they know, the speed in which they can receive information, because they're like all digital natives, they really have such instant access to things. So because of that instant access, I think they're more in touch with who they are as individuals, and they're more in touch with that cultural side of them. So now, because we are more global than back in the 80s when I'm growing up as a 10-year-old, 10-year-old Patty in 1980s has to go to the library to find books. There's no such thing as the internet. Phone calls were really, really expensive. So unless my parents said, okay, we're going to go to the temple because there's a festival, I wouldn't know anything about what Buddhist festivals are like. I wouldn't have access to that. There was no such thing as a Thai town, which we do have now in Los Angeles, one of the largest Thai towns there. But we didn't have, like, you were really kind of struggling and working to just fit in and survive as a kid, where now those cultural issues are front and center. So I think it's the time and the generations have changed. That's why there's an opening for these diverse stories, and publishers, or traditional publishing at least, is trying to engage that and embrace it a little bit more, while still keeping the gates really, really narrow as to who they let in and when they let in. So I think it's just the time for it.
I have to agree, Patri, on that one as well, because I think there's still work to be done when it comes to diverse stories, but we have come a long way. So, fun fact, I founded a network of readers 16 years ago, Readers Review, and that was, now it's evolved into a network of readers, writers, creators, bloggers. Like, we've got a lot of people as part of that network. And over the years, like at least first 5 years of that network, there was not a lot of diverse reading recommendations when we were meeting in person. And I found, not just as an Indonesian Australian, but as a Muslim reader as well, that at the height of Islamophobia, that's when we had more Muslim authors coming out of the woodwork with their stories, but not just stories of identity. It was, stories about acceptance, about respect, and about a character, just a Muslim character who happens to be Muslim, but they go on an adventure. It doesn't always have to be about how to survive as a Muslim in the Western world and things like that. That's what has changed, I've noticed as well. And that was, I think, the turning point. And one of the biggest turning points for me as a Muslim consumer was the Ms. Marvel Kamala Khan from the Marvel series. I always say she's my homegirl, and I always choke up when I think about her and talk about her. But she was a pivotal moment for a Muslim, because for once we were the good guys. For way too long in media and in, TV, we were always conditioned to see a negative portrayal. Oh, we've just lost Rada. She'll come back soon. We always see a negative portrayal of a Muslim person in headlines. And so as a writer, we have that power through the pen and storytelling to shift that narrative. And I think, yeah, like you said, whilst the gates are still quite closed and quite thin, we have sort of broken that barrier, and there is, a lot more space for it now. And I found, particularly not with the top publishers, because there's still a lot of gatekeeping there, I think, but in like smaller press as well, because I'm published through small press. Shout out to Malati Lam, who is of Melby Rose Publishing, who is my contact there, and believed in my book. And she's a small press, and even her books up through Melby Rose Publishing too. And she wrote the Aisha Dean mysteries, which was the first time I read an Indonesian Australian hijabi girl who solves mysteries around the world. And again, it wasn't a struggle about her faith. It was, no, I know who I am. I'm very comfortable with who I am. I'm going on an adventure to solve a mystery. So yeah, I think that's starting to, that tide is starting to change as well. Yes. Isabel, bringing you in your experience with what you've seen, what do you think has changed?
Yeah, I think it's just having more kids, like as Patri mentioned, kids being more aware of their identity and just wanting to claim it for themselves, and just going out into the bookshops and wanting to see themselves represented in books. So I think Asians in general are are underrepresented in publishing, but I think out of the Asian category, Southeast Asians is like even less. I feel like East Asian gets a bit more representation, but Southeast Asian, it kind of gets lumped into one category of just generic Southeast Asians. So I feel like kids who are Southeast Asian, they want to see themselves in stories and not as, like what kind of Southeast Asian are you, but they want to see like who they are in books, and they want to see their culture represented, and they want to see themselves as the heroes of their own stories, which I think is, the main factor of why kids read books because they want to see themselves as heroes. And especially for Southeast Asian kids who don't really see themselves specifically represented in books, but just in media in general, they are starting to look for that specific and accurate representation, and not something that was written by someone outside of the culture that is completely wrong. But then they want to see stories that are written by actual other Southeast Asians who do have that experience and can give that accurate representation. Yeah, so I think it's also because in Australia, particularly, it's a very multicultural place, and here where we are here in Western Sydney. So I'm noticing that around my neighborhood and the schools and some of the kids that I've talked to, they do want to see that representation in their school libraries and in the local bookshops as well.
Fantastic. And yeah, like also what Patri was mentioning before, that the moment, oh, here we go, right, it's back. The moment that we would see an Asian character in a book or in a movie, it's always that token Asian kid. And this is where I had the welcome back at, and this is where I had the opportunity to sort of reverse that. So in my Harimau King, I think you may have picked up on the fact that in the group of teens, James is your token white boy that's in that group. And that wasn't, to be offensive or anything. That was an accurate depiction of my family. My father being Australian, he's the only Australian in my Indonesian side of the family. He's the only white person. So when we're in a photo, he stands out so clearly next to my family. And that was like, I thought, you know what? When we reverse it, he's the token white person. And that was a clear representation that has happened too. So I wanted to write a story that, reflected on my family and that true accuracy that, the Asian culture is not token. It was the minority, the majority of it. And he was part of that, and that cultural diversity and interaction as well. So yeah, I love it. That's very, very accurate what you're all talking about today. And like what you said, Isabel, as well, that kids want to see themselves as the hero, and you can't be what you can't see if you don't have that representation. So it's amazing that the four of us are, I guess, leading the charge on that one, I have to say, in the MG space. We also talked about, and you mentioned this earlier as well, about authenticity and retaining that authenticity in your character, maybe even sprinkling part of the language through the book. How do you balance that authenticity with your character, where you want to access your own, your own audience from your own culture, but also want to access that non-Southeast Asian audience as well? How do you balance that? If anybody wants to answer that, one's open to the floor. Actually, Ryder, you're back.
I
We'll
can
start
try.
with you, right? Yeah.
You can hear me.
Yeah, you're back.
But,
It's all good.
So again, I was really inspired by how Hannah Al-Kaf wrote in her book, how she didn't have glossaries, she didn't italicize Malay words. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to lean right in and see how this feels. And it was actually really liberating and thrilling to like finally center myself, my experience, and have, another child get that same feeling. I mean, we had to grow up looking at what scones were back in Singapore, and like all this British terminology and like all these white people things that weren't even relevant to us. Why? Because for the longest time, that has been set as the precedent of the only true story, which is ridiculous. We have oral storytelling traditions in our culture for generations, before colonization came and wrecked everything. So I love this movement of like decolonizing literature, writing, realizing that oral traditions are beautiful and legitimate. And I guess, and that's what was in my story. Like the stories from Inshira's grandma was stories she got from her grandma. And like nobody necessarily wrote anything down, but we tell them, we repeat them, we internalize them. And I guess I had to push back really hard. I still remember my literary agent was helping me edit it, and she had an intern at the time who basically like massacred my manuscript with like really white centered feedback. And I had to like grit my teeth and lean onto my safe people and just say, no, I disagree with everything you're basically saying. Agency is different when you are a neurodivergent Malay Muslim hijabi girl who's 12 navigating the world. She's not going to be like a white boy. It's different. And you would think that's the most ridiculously simple thing to conceptualize, but apparently not. So, and that a people pleaser. I don't like rocking the boat. I like to keep the peace. But writing this book and getting out into the world has taught me so much about standing up for myself and the vision of my story, and trusting that eventually the right people will see it for what it was. But it all comes back to mindset and what I believe. Because if I don't give my book a chance, if I don't give Inshira permission to breathe, then who else is going to be able to? So it's very that internal battle and acceptance and compassion. And yeah, and it was in the end like really exciting to see like my daughters and my son holding up my book and, you know, talking about it, bringing the book to school, trying to pitch it to their friends. It was just, it's so adorable. I'm like, oh, thank you. Don't give away the bookmarks though. Yeah, it's like, it's really funny. So it's absolutely worth it, but it's not easy in the beginning until it does, until you keep saying, no, this is my default, this is my normal, you know, get used to it.
Yeah, and that's very good that you stuck to your guns there, Carl. Like you had to really like that's how you be true to yourself as a writer as well. And that was one of the things I said to my publisher as well. I mean, I didn't have that battle where, you know, things had to be, you know, stripped back or anything because it was accepted as no, this is an own voice story and it's very authentic. And I actually put in Bahasa Sunda dialect in addition to Bahasa Indonesian language. And that was very important to me to have that authenticity of Sundanese culture because every culture across the archipelago is very different from one another. And even though you identify or someone identifies as Indonesian, the dialect or the values and the culture is very different from one another. So it was very important to have that authentic West Javanese, especially because it's never been done. And yeah, you know, like Patri, Mom, how do I say this? I can't Google translate this. Okay, Mom, how do I do this? Like that, I had that conversation too. But yes, it's very important to be true to yourself as a writer and to stick to your guns. And I love that you did that, Kurt. So thank you for sharing as well. Isabel, let's cross over to you with the Filipino culture because I've seen some words sprinkle through. And I think you did a really good job in balancing. Tell us your trick of the trade on that one.
So I was honestly kind of hesitant on including so many Filipino words. So in the book, the words are in either Tagalog or Bisaya, which is another language that's spoken in the Philippines. And I was really hesitant on this because I know that in like Filipino words in general can be a lot longer compared to English words. And I was wondering, since this is a middle grade book, will the kids be able to, you know, like still immerse themselves in the story with so many Filipino language words sprinkled throughout? But then I sort of thought, like from another perspective, you do get a lot of Western fantasy books with even longer names. Like when you look at things like Game of Thrones or Throne of Glass, the names in there's like so many of them. And if people can keep track of those and still enjoy the story, then why can I not put in Filipino language words in my book? So then I just decided to go for it. So then, yeah, all of the characters have got traditional names or names that like mean something in a Filipino language. And then there's a lot of references also to Filipino culture and then like everyday household objects that are used. So I use the Filipino names instead of the English, what they're called in English. And it was really interesting as well because during the copy editing phase, I think the copy editor wanted to change some of like these words into italics because they were like a foreign language. But then my editor was like, just leave them as Romanized words because yeah, they're part of the story. And in the book, all of the characters are Filipino. So theoretically, all of the words should be Romanized because that's just like the language that they'd be speaking. So yeah, I think it was just about overcoming that initial hesitancy and just claiming the space as this is a Filipino story. I can put as much Filipino things as I want in it. And that was also ties into what we were talking about earlier of being as authentic as possible. And something that can make it really authentic and accurate and relatable to other Filipino readers as well is just by including language in the book and just showing that it's not something to be embarrassed about or afraid of. It's a Filipino story. You can be as Filipino as you want. So yeah, that's how I kind of went about it in the book. But yeah, for non-Filipino readers, there are contextual clues as well, so that it's pretty easy to follow along. Yeah, so I just want to be as authentic as possible in writing the story and let Filipino readers see themselves represented in it through the language that's in the book.
Fantastic. And look, if we can learn Elvish script, I'm pretty sure we can tap into an actual language. So I think, yes, I like how you're thinking there as well to include that as well. And contextual clues was my balancing act as well. So I didn't want to over translate everything, but there was a context, like I would have the Bahasa Indonesian, and then the next sentence would give a context as to what that was. So I was still able to have Sumaya be true to herself, and the character was still quite authentic, without over translating everything. So it was still accessible. Patri, your balancing act, how did you do yours?
Um, I leaned in really heavily. A lot of times I knew that once I decided I was going to infuse Thai culture into it, the Thai words in the language was key. I had the same italicization conversation with my publishers. Mine's with a small press. So I'm with Sora Books, which is the non-Muslim imprint of Scheherazade Shelves. And so all of their books are mostly Muslim and they're clean reads and friendly reads, but I was their first non-Muslim signed book. And we had that same conversation where when I first included the words, she wanted to italicize it. And I was like, nope, don't do it. This is my definitive argument where it's a deal breaker for me. If you're going to go through and italicize all of the Thai words in it, I am not going to stick with you. I do not want this. You have to make sure that the words are normalized, because just like for you, Isabel, there are no American or white characters in my book. They're all Thai, but they're called mixed. They're just like the cloud people. So everybody's going to speak Thai. They're going to speak Mic, and they're learning this thing. So I also made sure there's no italicization. That's just what they speak. And I think the way that I incorporated a lot of things is common words, phrases that you're used to, simple things. I did rely on Google Translate before I kind of had my mom and my sister go, okay, well, does this sound right? And what I find is with Thai, we can't always write things phonetically. And so, like, you can go to 4 or 5 different Thai restaurants and try to order pad Thai, and every menu will have it spelled like differently. There's no like common English translation or English spelling that can easily be done. So a lot of times when I would write it, I would write the words the way that they sound to me. I would put it on like a screen reader to have it read it back to me to see if it sounds right. And then I would have my kids say it to say, hey, say this word to me. And does it like read the Thai that's supposed to be Thai? How does it sound? And if it sounds right to my ear, then I'm like, okay, that's the spelling I'm going to stick with. So even if no other Thai author anywhere writes it that way, that's the way that I'm going to include it. And then there are a lot of, just like when we have the Western ear, like you can't say your B's or P's or F's, like a lot of Thai letters have that same diphthong issue, where I'm growing up saying words that I always think it has like a hard B, but I'll tell it to my mom and she's like, no, but when we write it in Thai, it's like a G. And I look at her like, what are you talking about? So there was like a language struggle there in trying to do that. But definitely leaning in and just saying, hey, I'm not going to italicize these words. You have to rely on the context clues. It's not that complicated. I mean, what else? They're not having big, long speeches, with the exception of I do have a long spell at the end. So mini spoiler there, but you do kind of see these long kind of slips or scenes where they're having conversations, but a lot of it does rely on the context clues that if kids are smart enough to pick up and read between the lines, you're going to be able to assume, kids are watching international things, they're watching animes. You're like, that's the audiences that you might assume will pick up a book such as this, where they're going to listen to things like my daughter's a staunch indie kid. Like, so if we watch animes, we're like a hardcore subtitle family. I don't want to listen to the English dubs of any kind of shows that I watch. I want to hear the original language. And so you're paying an homage to it. But when you talk about dialects, there are 3 dialects in Thailand. So I rely on the Central Thai dialects in this first book. But my father's from Southern Thailand. So I'm incorporating the Southern Thai dialect in the second book. And that's like a real shift where it's trying, and that's a struggle in and of itself because it is an oral language. It's an oral tradition. It's not written any differently. So trying to find those words and to hear it, especially since he's not here for me to ask him anymore, it feels like that's kind of a struggle. And you're trying to listen and remember different phrases of how I had to interact with like my dad's side of the family in southern Thailand and how different their dialect was. And it's like, I didn't know. I'm like, you guys, I'm lucky I even speak Thai. That now you're throwing another dialect at me. It was definitely like a challenge there, but trying to incorporate that new exposure because a lot of Thai people or people outside of Thailand wouldn't realize that there are multiple dialects. And so they just assume, oh, okay, everybody speaks Thai. And it is Central Thai, but having that nuanced to like those there adds another layer of authenticity. So being able to incorporate that and just shaking off shaking off the reviews of people who look at it and say, I don't understand why you have strange language and strange words. It doesn't even need it. Like, why is your story including these things? And it's like, girl, because that's what they say. That's how they talk. And so deal with it. If you, like you're saying, you can learn Elfish if you have people walking around speaking Klingon, which is like not even real, then you guys can rely on a real life language and try to figure out and be a little bit more open-minded of, I don't know, a culture that may be just a little bit different than yours. So it was definitely a requirement. I knew I was going to be in there and I didn't shy away from it. And then I loved, like, that was one of the things I loved with yours, Annie's, is how you incorporate those different dialects, knowing that our languages and our cultures, we have multiple dialects and it is an oral tradition. So we have to learn to write it down because I don't find a lot of Thai authors writing children's stories. They're just simply translating Western stories into Thai, and they don't have these folklore stories. So when I try to go and research it, I'm like, well, where are these things? I'm like, what are the kids reading? And I look at my mom, like, Mom, what did you read? And she's like, nothing. I don't want to read. I don't want to read. So you rely on this oral tradition. So it's hopefully taking the opportunity to bridge that gap, and then making sure that it's like, you're going to use it, you deal with it. I'm not writing this book for you, so I don't want to pander to your Western eyes or your gaze for it.
Oh, I feel you. I feel you with that, and especially with the oral tradition, we call it pantun in Indonesia. And again, that was the same thing. Like a lot of the particularly the stories of Prabu Raja Siliwangi, that was through my family. Like I mean, we do have things written on the internet, but you can't always rely on the internet. If you want authenticity, I had to go through family for that one. So I definitely hear you on that. Unfortunately, we are actually running out of time on our session here. I could talk to all of you all day about this, but it's been a fantastic session getting to know your publication journey, your writing journey, but also that importance of cultural awareness and representation, why it matters, and the fact that we are actually part of that movement that's leading the charge. Hopefully, that's going to inspire the younger readers who are reading our books to pick up a pen and write their stories as well. And I spend a lot of time, mentoring young kids as well, locally, to get their stories on the shelf and to move away from that struggle. It doesn't always have to be about struggle. Be unapologetically you, be unapologetically and proud of who you are, whether you're Thai, Filipino, Malaysian, Indonesian, hijabi, Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, whatever it is that you are, be proud of who you are and write that story and go on that adventure, because there's no rule that says you can't do that. So no, that's been a fantastic and very insightful conversation. So thank you to all of you for being here. To close us out, can you tell us, name one character from the book that you've written that you would love to have a coffee with and why? I'll lead the way. I was going to say Prabu Raja Siliwangi for obvious reasons, but I think I'd be too intimidated to meet my royal ancestor. So I'm thinking possibly my character Alif, who is the cousin, Sumaya's cousin. He's quite annoying because he's quite mischievous, but I think he'd be a lot of fun to have a coffee with. So I think he would be the one I'd love to have a coffee with. Let's go with you, Isabel. Name a character from your book you'd love to have a tea or coffee with.
I probably just have a coffee with main character Tani, mainly to apologize for everything that I put her through in the book. But yeah, I also think, yeah, she's very spunky, brave, and determined, and I think she'd just be great to have like a chat with over coffee.
An apologetic tea.
Yes, take this as an offering.
I'm sorry, peace offering. Karada, your character.
This is a hard one. I'd either say Inshira for the exact same reason. Like, I'm so sorry for what you had to go through, but you were awesome. Or Sensei Bilqis, who's like a half Jin, instructor who can like take me through the Jin realm. Like, yeah, it would be fun.
Yeah, that would be cool. I would love to meet her too. She's scary but awesome. Last but definitely not least, who would you love to have a coffee with, Petri?
I thought this would be an easy one, and unfortunately, I don't think either of my main characters would be it. I would probably have a coffee with Mood, and she's the villainess. She is the leader of the Night Army, and she's gone through it, and she's the known outsider. So her and I, maybe like my secret angst and anger is filtered through her, because she has a lot of speeches about being the outsider and being exiled to the Vanished Lands. And so I would want to sit and then chit chat with her as to like, why do you feel the way you feel? And I think I hope I did justice to your plight and I didn't make you all bad, because I don't think that I love morally gray characters, and she was my morally gray villain, that she's not all 100% bad, as most villains shouldn't be.
They all have a backstory, so I think
Yes.
it should be interesting to have a chat with 100%. Petri Jones, Rhoda Shah Adil, Isabel Magnadino, thank you so much for sharing the virtual stage with me as we delivered a special event for Book Fair Australia. Book Fair Australia is going to be live on February, March 2026. Have a look on the socials for the details there. But we'll definitely be coming to you live with more special events such as these in the lead up to this main event. But to all of you, thank you so much for tuning in at home. Please make sure you go out and get our books as soon as you can if you haven't done so already. But thank you very much for tuning in, and to the three of you for sharing the virtual stage. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.